So welcome everyone to our AI security interview series. Today we have Kai Greshake from Germany, who's an AI security researcher. Hi, Kai. Hi, Kai.
Hi, nice to talk to you.
Great to have you here. Kai, as some of you might know, is one of the pioneers in discovering a lot of vulnerabilities in LLMs and generative AI in general. He specifically conducted a lot of research on indirect prompt injections, and you might have seen some of his work and then tweets go viral. I've seen it at least 5, 10 times, and it's also been a source of inspiration for a lot of things that we think about at Robust Intelligence. So, very happy to have him here today for an interview. So, maybe to start out, Kai, would you be able to give a quick introduction about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your flattering introduction. Yeah, I'm a regular cybersecurity guy. At least I was a few years ago. I was doing pen testing, security audits, consulting, and then I did a hard pivot into ML. Sort of was ignoring machine learning for a long time, but with language models, I sort of saw the advent of it, and I was excited. I was getting into it, and then I noticed security in language models is a huge blind spot. People have been very worried and concerned about safety. So the behavior of models in the absence of adversaries, what sort of damage that could do. And I was diving into the security. So being the red teamer trying to break the models.
Interesting. And from starting to explore the vulnerabilities of LLM, how did you get to discover indirect prompt injection as a vulnerability? And maybe tell me for the audience, it'd be great for you to also describe a little bit about the concept of indirect prompt injections.
Yeah, so I noticed it was pretty early when ChatGPT came out. People noticed that OpenAI had certain ideas of what you should be able to do with the chatbot and things that you shouldn't be able to do. And they were finding ways to get around that. And people were starting to call that jailbreaks and prompt injections because they realized the sort of trusted instructions that OpenAI was giving to the chatbot were being overridden by funny stories users were presenting and things of that nature. And at the time, it came very quickly to me a sort of change in perspective that, hey, it's not just users we're talking about after all. As soon as you build any application on top of these language models, you'll be pulling in way more untrusted input from all kinds of places, not just the user themselves. And then we're usually talking security all of a sudden, right? Because talking the same thing as malware. So indirect prompt injection is a prompt injection. So we're including untrusted data into our stream of stuff that's being processed by the new AI models. Doesn't even need to be a language model necessarily. And adversaries cannot just override what the model might, classify something as or control the output thereof. But really, it's the equivalent of text-based malware. Well, also doesn't need to be text-based, but malware for the AI's brain, quote unquote, if you like, right? It's all
Interesting.
happening inside the language model. Nobody needs to compromise a real computer anymore if the language model has all the data that the attacker wants and can deliver it, and also even do way more advanced stuff to manipulate the user than any attacker could before.
Can you give me an example of an indirect prompt injection attack that you've seen or you've done yourself?
Sure. One example would be recently Google's Bard, where it's a similar chatbot to OpenAI's ChatGPT, except that it, uh, by opt-in, the feature was opt-in, but if you did opt-in, it would have access to your emails and documents. And so every time you'd prompt it and give it a query, it would fetch, relevant information from your account and put that into the context to give you a better response.
Yeah.
And indirect prompt injection means all of that data pulled from your account can come from third parties. So we were, if you share the document with someone through Google Workspace, they don't even need to accept it, and it showed up in Bot, right? That's one way to compromise the session and then access other information in that session, or potentially even get Bot to fetch other data from your Gmail account and exfiltrate that. Or, very simple, someone sends you an email with malicious instructions, your assistant looks at the email, and then it's compromised. And the downstream actions could be arbitrary. Just like when someone executes code on your regular computer, it doesn't really, there's no constraint for what that malware could be doing. It could be doing anything your computer is allowed to do or has
Got it.
access to.
So just to summarize my understanding, so this Google LLM agent has access to various things, and one of them can be an adversary's, like say, email, which might have weird instructions to then tell LLMs to go and find other things that might be very sensitive information that an individual owns, and that can be exfiltrated and be done to do other things. Is that at a high level? What
That's right.
you're saying.
It
Okay.
could be
Okay.
impacting any of the traditional security properties, the CIA properties, if anybody knows those. Yeah, it could be, we're talking, maybe subtle manipulation, maybe for advertising purposes, but also way more malicious things. So instead of just giving some kind of propaganda message, you just, hey, assistant, you know the user so well, why don't you manipulate them to believe this, right? Or manipulate them to download this other application, or, do some other action, or reveal some other piece of information that the attacker wants. So it's like, turning the language model into the AI's little minion, working for the attacker at, exploiting the user.
That's a great metaphor. And I want to double click on what you just said, and I think this is definitely, it sounds like a very kind of serious and significant attack. I'd love to double click on the kind of the actual consequences, right? You mentioned obviously data exfiltration, and but why is it so? Why is such a significant threat, right, in the prompt injections that people and really the security organizations should care about?
Well, these escalate very quickly. So say you have any kind of agent, it doesn't need to be a user's assistant. Let's say that agent has any possibility to retrieve external data that is not trusted, and then the ability to downstream trigger some kind of action to also submit data. So maybe it's capable of sending emails, maybe it's a marketing thing or a company bot. Those could be taken over with the equivalent of wormable text malware. So we're going back to the sort of MySpace days of security, late 90s, early 2000s. It really is potentially even worse than that, because we have no equivalent of security practices that we have on regular operating systems for the LLM space. We're executing everything in one context. And a lot of people are still concerned with maybe deploying LLMs and through traditional security vulnerabilities, their backend hardware being compromised. Well, the LLM has access to all the user's data that really is valuable, and it should to be very useful. And so those will become the most prized assets for attackers to compromise. I don't think that the sort of traditional security might even take a backseat in those cases.
Interesting. And sounds like from what you're describing, one of the places where this vulnerability can show up a lot is in a Copilot type, use case with the Google Assistant and probably with Microsoft.
That's right.
I'm curious to hear if there are any other places where you've seen these indirect prompt injections show up and also has a significant kind of downside.
Yeah. You already mentioned Copilot. I don't think that's very obvious to most people yet, even. Your auto completion engines can be prompt injected through indirect means, meaning if you're a developer, you could be importing a package, and in that package's documentation, there could be text meticulously crafted to look like usual documentation, maybe examples of how not to use that API, but they trick your auto completion into implementing vulnerable application. Could be one thing. We've seen military use cases where LLMs are being used to digest all the threat intelligence data and then tell operators what to do. That is a pretty big threat, in my opinion. I don't know if that's necessarily unexpected, though. Today, there was a case we saw, I think it was, I forgot which company it was. I think it was a Google paper where they showed their pre-training data being curated through prompts. So they would take a piece of data and they would prompt the language model, hey, does this piece of data look valuable to train on or not? And how valuable is it? And so people have been very interested in poisoning that training data for a while. But these types of techniques all of a sudden make it easier to sort of poison the training data, because if you take all the training data and you reduce it 1,000-fold to do fine tuning, and you still get your adversarial examples in there through prompting the language model to say, hey, this piece of data is very valuable, please include it, maybe many times. And so yeah, that's something where, even I didn't expect it to pop up today. There was an example of Google's security POM, which was supposed to be able to look at binaries and other files and then judge based on the data that is seen of vulnerable malware and so on. Sorry, not vulnerable applications and malware, to judge if the executable or something is a threat. And it was integrated in VirusTotal, I think. And people very quickly built binaries which included text which would be read, which instructed the language model to claim something about there being too many puppies in that binary for it to be dangerous. And yeah,
Interesting.
there it pops up again.
I remember seeing one of the works that you've done is around injecting prompt injections and indirect prompt injections to resumes, and I think you built a tool for it. Maybe you
Yeah,
could tell us a little bit more about that too.
sure. I mean, it was just sort of to highlight the points that I was making for a while. I didn't actually expect that to be so successful, but I think there's a lot of people who are looking for jobs right now, which makes it sort of wanted. But yeah, it's very basic. You can upload your PDF file, your resume to the website. It's not being uploaded to the website. In fact, it's all local processing. I don't keep any of that data. But it inserts a prompt injection with invisible text into that PDF, which is read by, say if there's a recruiting company and they use something, a language model or like ChatGPT, to judge if applicants' resumes, fulfill their standards, and maybe they're looking for keywords or something. Well, with that injection, you should be, pretty high up in the list every time if they use a language model. And
Got it.
yeah, I don't know. I was quite surprised when I got emails of people actually using it. I didn't expect that to be the case. It was more of a joke, but yeah, it works.
So it sounds like you created it as a joke, and you mentioned it was successful. So curious, like are a lot of people using your tool? Like, and what kind of emails are you getting from people?
Well, I'm getting emails of people developing their own prompts, sort of refining the the prompts that I put in for the example. I prepared a couple of templates. They're very basic, and yeah, so people are building more advanced prompts to put into their resumes, which is good because I'm sure at this point, certain recruiting companies have caught onto this, and the prompt specifically used there will get blocked. So if you just use the ones from the website, you should assume that it's not good enough. But if you make a few edits, I'm pretty sure it still is effective.
Interesting. Got it. This is super interesting, and obviously prompt injection, and especially indirect prompt injection, I feel like is one of the most serious threats in AI security. I'd also love to hear your take on other types of threats in LLMs and LLM applications. So, are there ones besides prompt injection that you think are biggest threats in these LLM applications?
It's a difficult question because I think prompt injections are just so far ahead of the pack in terms of impact and how they're going to impact how we can use and deploy language models in the future and how much benefit we get from them. But I think the second for me would be pre-training data. So poisoning that pre-training data through adversaries. This obviously also downstream impact includes prompt injection again, because you would be, processing some kind of untrusted input which contains trigger words which trigger that backdoor. But basically, with very little money, attackers should now be capable of poisoning the language models we all have, and we should assume that they do contain these backdoors, certain magic keywords that, if mentioned, should allow you to circumvent any sort of policy or adversarial robustness training they've performed on improving those models, at least to some extent.
Interesting, interesting. And I guess now looking at this from kind of the side of defense. So looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges and also opportunities for securing these the AI systems that we're developing against these emerging threats like prompt injections?
Mm, I would say the challenges and opportunities, they're sort of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So one I would say is alignment. Alignment is an issue that crops up in indirect prompt injection. Indirect prompt injection is a sub problem of alignment because you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I really get the model to understand that it does and is supposed to do what I want or what the company wants, and not what some kind of, like, how do I demark, hey, this is untrusted input, whatever they tell you, it shouldn't influence the thing that you actually want or want to perform. And this sort of adversarial alignment misdirection, is part of the larger problem. And I think if we, it's a big challenge, but if we make progress on it, it'll help us also solve, the broader alignment problems when it comes to safety. So in the absence of adversaries, how do we make sure, very smart models still, want to do what we want? And so I think it's a, challenge and opportunity, and, alignment just keeps cropping up everywhere. It's the all of the complexities of our real world. How do we bake those into models? And it's going to be a never-ending battle, I think. But yeah, I think we can make progress on it. And sort of maybe the second thing would be the balancing the pressures. There's going to be forces encouraging people to deploy these models faster and give them more autonomy, deploy more capable agents because of
Yeah.
the promised utility and because they'll be competing in markets. And we'll see if the sort of security compromise that we incur with that will be enough to, well, I mean, will be recognized enough to deter people from doing that, and whether or not there will be actually adversaries exploiting those systems regularly. If not, then companies and competitors might be forced to deploy agents in unsafe ways because otherwise they get outcompeted. And in a way, I guess this is a challenge and opportunity as well for the attackers as well. Maybe we need some black hats also to adjust the market forces, right? If we just have a runaway effect where people are forced into deploying more and more agentic systems, but then they are wildly insecure, there could be events in the future where a large part of those systems go down in very quick succession or at the same time. If we're talking about something like wormable prompt malware or something.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and I feel like in software security, there's been that balance, and I'm sure like over the course of time, people have found the right balance within organizations with CISOs being a pretty independent role with its own team, looking at the security of different tech stack from various perspectives, and right now I feel like AI security is an emerging field, but hopefully there will be more and more researchers and in the space and CISO security teams would start to own AI security, for example, more as an agenda. And that way we can strike the balance between kind of the offense of building more applications and then actually protecting these applications. Well, thank you, Kai, so much for the time. Last thing, if you we have a few more minutes, so if you want to, promote anything that you're working on these days, things that you're excited about, feel free to share. And yeah.
I think our original paper from last year is still has been read in full by two little people. So I encourage everybody to read that and also go read my blog, and that's pretty much it.
What is the paper on?
Oh, it's the indirect prompt injection paper,
Okay.
not what you
Okay.
signed up for.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kai. And yeah, look forward to the next security interview series. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.